I've gone ahead and saved off that marriage between Channel Mixer and Black and White as merged CM plus BW.PSD found inside the 18 black-white folder. I've also got another version of this file that I'd like you to open. It's called enhancedgothic.psd. And the difference here is that we just have the shadows highlights layer working together with the original and a black and white layer on top. And that's it. And these are those same black and white settings. Reading from reds down to magentas, we've got 60 for reds, 130 for yellows, 130 for greens, 150 and 70 for cyans, blues, and magentas. And the reason I'm bringing back this version of the image is because I want to answer a couple of questions. First of all, how do you tint the image? So in other words, how do you infuse it with a little bit of color? Like you might want to warm it up to create a sepia tone, or you might want to cool it down to create a bluish version of the image. And also, how do you reveal some colors that were associated with the original image? So for example, back here in the original, if I turn off the BW layer for a second, you can see that this forward woman is wearing this red fake fur or whatever it is. And let's say I want to bring out that red color. I think it'll go well with the final black and white version of the image. How do I paint down to it? Well, let me go ahead and answer both of those questions. I'll turn the BW layer back on. Now, tinting can be a really good idea because consider this. If you were to print this image to either a black and white printer or send it out for commercial reproduction using just one ink, black, and that's it, you're going to get a fairly flat print. And that's because one ink by itself is capable of representing probably, depends on your printer's capabilities, but most likely less than 100 different luminance levels from white, paper white, all the way to black. And I'm using quote fingers here because when you're just using black ink, your black isn't all that dark. So it's going to be a fairly lightweight image. Whereas if you go ahead and render the image out using all of the process inks, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black working together, then you can create some extremely rich blacks, and you have all sorts of luminance levels in between that you can render out as well. So a little bit of tint goes a long way where black and white output is concerned. I definitely recommend this approach. Now, you don't want to go too crazy with it. You don't have to scream color because after all, you want black and white. But if you infuse the image with just a little bit of color, it can work out very nicely. So there's a couple different ways to do it. You have this tint option that's available to you inside of the black and white adjustment. That's one way to go, but that gives you just one color to work with. You're just basically infusing the midtones with the color, and you're using neutral black and white as your ultimate highlights and shadows. Whereas if you want to infuse some other colors into the image, you're going to need to take up the gradient map adjustment, which I'll show you before this chapter is done. Anyway, the advantage of tint is it's very easy to apply. So go ahead and turn on this checkbox. And by default, you're going to see this sort of ultra sepia tone right here, which is quite yellow as well. I think it's way too much color, quite frankly. And to adjust the color, go ahead and click on this color swatch to the right of the word tint. That brings up the color picker dialog box. And if you wanted to, you could adjust that hue. I could send it down to 35, for example, in order to warm up the colors a little bit so they're not quite so yellow and they have a little bit more orange in them or a little bit more of a wood color, if you like. But in my case, I'm going to leave that set to 42 degrees. And the reason is because I want some nice contrast with that frock in the background. I am, however, going to lower the saturation like crazy. I'll go ahead and press Shift down arrow to lower that value to 10%. And then I'll actually arrow it down to 6% like so. So we have just a little hint of color going on. All right, click OK in order to accept that modification. If you like it, you can go your own way, of course. All right, now let's scroll up so that we can see all of this woman's fake fur right there. And I'm going to turn off this black-white adjustment for just a moment so we can see the original colors. And I'll click inside the shadows highlights layer to make it active. And then I'll grab my quick selection tool, which fares the best for this particular technique. You could also just try brushing in a mask if you want to, but quick selection works pretty well. And I'm going to increase the size of my brush. Now, it is going to take some back and forth work here. So I'll go ahead and paint along the entire frock. That selects too much. So I'll Alt drag or Option drag over these details to deselect them, and I'll Alt or Option drag here to deselect this area as well. Now I need to reduce the size of my cursor and paint in this region. And if you're not careful, you get this. I shouldn't say if you're not careful. There's no way to avoid that. This is a quick selection tool after all. It does whatever it wants to do. Anyway, let's go ahead and alt paint around these details to get rid of them. And that looks pretty good. I might actually reduce the size of my cursor further by pressing the left bracket key, of course, and just drag. You may recall that by default, the quick selection tool is set to add to the existing selection, so I don't have to press the shift key, and I'll just paint in there a little more. Now, it's not worth grabbing this little bit of red under her nose because nobody's going to miss it, and adding it in there, based on my experience, doesn't do us any good. All right, now let's switch over to the black and white layer. Click on it to make it active. Let's hide these options here so that we can see the entire layers panel by double-clicking to the right of the word masks. And then I'll drop down with black and white active. I'll drop down to the add a layer mask icon, and instead of clicking on it, I'll alt-click or option-click because we want to mask away the selected portion of the image. And that ends up working out pretty nicely. You know what? I think I want to just apply a little bit of blur to that mask. Actually, we should check the mask out. Alt-click or option-click on it. Yeah, it's got a little bit of a weird line. You may see more weird line than that. To get rid of the weird line, simplest thing to do is just grab your lasso tool right there and just select around this region like so. And assuming white is your background color, which it is for me, press the backspace key or the delete key on the Mac. Then get out of town. Let's go ahead and alt-click or option-click once again on that layer mask to return to the composite image. Press Control-D, Command-D on the Mac to make sure you deselect your image. And now, with the layer mask active, let's go ahead and blur it. And blurring is another thing that you can do on the fly from that masks panel. So I'll go ahead and bring up the mask panel like so. So I've showed you density. Now I'll show you how feather works. We can go ahead and feather this layer mask on the fly, which is to say we can blur it on the fly. And by on the fly, I mean parametrically. We can change our mind anytime we want to. So we can blur it today, unblur it tomorrow. Totally up to us what we want to do. And I'm going to take it, to 4. 4 pixels actually works out pretty well for this effect here. And if you felt like you didn't get enough of the redness over on the left-hand side, then you could paint in a little bit of layer mask as well, if you like. But I actually feel like this is pretty great. I'll go ahead and fill the screen with the image once again by pressing the F key a couple of times this time around. And we'll go ahead and zoom in. And this is that version of the image. A little bit of sepia tone added. We've brought back the reds from the frock as well. I could spend a little more time painting in there, but that's actually where the red ends. So that just happens to be the way the color renders out inside the image. In the next exercise, I'm going to show you a better way to infuse a black and white image with color using Gradient Map.